Hey, you made it to week 3 of Capstone. You're still alive, nobody's been crushed, and in fact, you now hopefully have a bit of a plan, or at least a blueprint for what you want to accomplish. So congratulations, welcome to week 3 of Capstone. Do anything too complicated this week. You should be reading. That's the plain and simple truth of it all, and that's always going to be the case, at least up until closer to the end of this whole project. You should be reading. I would hope that you are reading maybe about an article on average a day at least. If you're not, you should be reading more, and that's all you need to be doing right now. Reading, taking notes, maybe asking questions. That's what we're going to talk about today. So I thought it might help if I talk a little bit about my own experience. So, I mean, it's a complicated and convoluted process to do a PhD, but generally speaking, if you're doing an academic or scholarly PhD, like my PhD in media studies, you basically have to come up with a big argument and then do some research and then produce something that's about book length. And so, I mean, it sounds intimidating, but if you break it up, it's really not that bad. And I like to tell people, it would be much harder to wash dishes for 4 years or to do work that wasn't appreciated for 4 years than to read a bunch of books and then write some stuff. So I really feel like, I got it easy doing what I did. But yeah, it was still difficult to come up with something. And I knew from my past experience, I'd written about an area of Toronto that has bad reputation and gets bad press. And so that was what my master's was about. I'll put it up if you want to look at it just to get ideas. But that was what I had written about, and I said basically in my proposal that I wanted to do something similar, but in honesty, in all truth, I had no idea what I wanted to write about for my dissertation. And so I just started reading, which is why you should start reading, because you cannot do this without reading. It won't magically come to you. I hope that you have a Eureka moment, and we can talk about that. Archimedes famously came up with an equation for measuring, I believe it was mass of an object, or the volume of an object, I think. And he had this epiphany in the bathtub, and apparently he said, Eureka, and he jumped out of the bathtub and went running around naked because he was so happy he figured that out. Maybe that'll happen to you, maybe it won't. I'm not encouraging you to break any laws here, but hopefully you do have that moment where it's just like, that's it. And so for me, I had been reading and I had been thinking about, what do I want to write about? I want to write about something similar. And among other things, I was reading about gangs, right? And so I read these papers, and then this one paper I read, I still remember the moment. I was in London, Ontario, and I was just like, holy shit. And that's when I realized, after reading more studies, that there's actually no real definition of a gang. So there's all these studies about how many gangs there are, and there's all these studies about fear of gangs, and right-wing politicians are always like, the gangs are going to get you. You need more of us in power because the gangs are going to get you. But there's actually, in most cases, when people say gangs, they don't know what they mean. Like, they're just making it up. I mean, for example, could you define gang right now? Maybe not, but you would think that police, for example, or lawyers would be able to identify gangs and clearly define them. But they can't. Definitely not in Canada. In the US, there are a few definitions, but nobody really agrees on it. And so it's such a crazy idea, right? Like, people are being attacked for being in a gang, or there's this idea like there are gangs in the streets and there are gangs in urban areas. But then once you ask, like, okay, well, what is a gang? Nobody can really answer that. And so that's when I had my moment, like, oh, okay, I could study that. And so I did so by looking at different things and continuing to read, and then coming up with a fairly clear question, which was something to the effect of, what do people talk about in the media when they talk about gangs? So how do they, based on the context of the articles, how do they talk about gangs, and what kind of gangs are they talking about? And lo and behold, they're often talking about black men. And what I realized is that gangs are code for people of color, especially male groups that basically racists and white conservatives dislike. But they can't really say, like, I'm scared of young black men. So instead they say, effectively, I'm scared of gangs. So it's code. And you can see that because in some of the definitions of gangs that you find in the police reports and national surveys, they take off hate groups and white supremacists. So all of the sort of hateful white people are off the list of gangs. Most people don't consider women as gang members, or at least traditionally they haven't. And so you take most women off the list. And then mafia are not included, which traditionally have come from the Cosa Nostra in Italy and in Sicily and in places where it's generally white, considered white, European. And they also don't include biker gangs, which again are traditionally white men. And so all of the like bad white guys are off the list. Most women are off the list. And so who are you left with? Minorities in urban areas. And when they ask people about gangs, that's really what they're saying is like, how many scary young urban people are there, and does that make you scared? And so it's a way of coding something. And that's a really big problematic thing that not a lot of people know about. And so even though that's a horrible issue, I was very happy to figure it out, because then I knew what I wanted to study. And I only say this because right now you're probably thinking I have no fucking idea what I want to study. I mean, I have vague notions, and I've talked to you maybe, or I've talked to my friends, and I know I want to do something that involves XYZ. And so what I want you to do this week, and for the next couple of weeks really, is collect, as I've said before, as many articles about the topics that you're interested in as you can, and start to read it. And the more you read, and the more you think about it, and the more you fine-tune your questions, and that's what this week's activity is designed to do, the more you do that, the closer you will get to your own Eureka moment, where you jump out of the bathtub as you're reading an article and you say like, holy shit, I know exactly what my capstone's going to be about. I had no idea until I read this, but that's it. Again, you only do that by reading. So what I encourage you to do to get closer to this, it's hard to manufacture that moment, but it will come if you continue to read and think critically. So I would encourage you to think about, what are the assumptions that you and other people might take for granted relating to your topic? What do you actually know? And like I said, in my example, I was asking questions like, how many gangs are in Toronto at the time? And how dangerous are gangs really? And so all of that assumes that people know what gangs are. And so once I realized nobody really knows what a gang is, and they're actually using it in really troubling ways, then I kind of dropped down a level in terms of my analysis, and that made it a lot easier. Because instead of asking how many gangs are a threat in this region or something, I could literally ask like, what's a gang? And what are people calling gangs? And that made it so much easier for me. And so maybe you'll have a similar experience, or maybe you'll realize that there's some other key missing aspect of research, and you're going to help fill that in. You don't need to change the world, and you don't need to completely reinvent the wheel when it comes to studying something, or when it comes to how we understand something. You just need to find a little gap in knowledge that you can help fill, which is a modest but really important thing to do. So to get a Eureka moment, the best way to do it that I've found is to continue to read and continue to think about and continue to hone your questions so that they get a little bit more specific at a time. So maybe you're interested, as I said in an earlier video, right? Like, how are people represented in video games? That's a big question, and you're probably not going to have a Eureka moment with that. But the more you fine tune it, and the more you ask like, well, what is a video game? And what is a person when it comes to video games? Like, am I talking about the player? Am I talking about the avatar? Am I talking about the cutscene representations? And so there's all these ways to fine tune it. And at some point you'll realize like, there's this big gap in knowledge that every time I read, people make this assumption, or every time I read, no one ever answers this question. Maybe I can answer it, or maybe I can help. You don't even need to answer the question in many cases. You just need to sort of fill in a blank, which is maybe articulating the question in a better way. So don't stress. Don't worry if you haven't had that amazing moment, because it's not easy to create, but when you do get it, and I promise you'll get something like that this term, you will feel great, and it will all be worth it. Even though I'm sure you're stressing right now, thinking like, oh, I need that moment today or tomorrow. It might not come for a month. I hate to say that, but when it comes, you will be super happy, and I want to hear about it. You need to let me know as soon as it happens. Put some clothes on, articulate a little better. Like if you come up with it in the middle of the night, make sure you write it down, because you might forget it in the morning. But eventually you realize there's this gap that I can fill by asking a better question or by collecting research in a little bit better way. It doesn't need to be earth-shattering. It just needs to be like, wow, I can't believe I can't find this. I'm going to be the one to produce it. And that's always a really cool thing to do. And that's, I think, why research is so important, because you're actually creating something. You're not just regurgitating, and you're not just saying what other people have said. You're building on that in whatever way you think will help the world in some small way or another. You'll get through this, you'll be fine, you'll do an amazing job. I know all of you who are taking Capstone, and so I know what you're capable of. Get to work, start reading. I'll see you soon.